Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your host, Joanne Leon.
And on this episode, January 23rd, 2018, we're going to talk about Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's interesting speech on Syria and the way forward, quote unquote. So to get right to it, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, former CEO of ExxonMobil, gave a speech about essentially, my reading of it is a regime change speech. At least that's what it sounded like, the parts I've read. He also put out a video that is, it's a 1 minute, I guess, sort of cheesy marketing video from the time capsule 1983, which has elevator music and other kind of cheap, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 graphics, and ends with a commitment. The U.S. policy in Syria is to, quote, enable the Syrian people to attain their own God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, Joanne, apparently the U.S. policy in Syria now is to make Syria America.
Yeah, it looks that way. I'm going to play the video, and I'll do a voiceover for you in my best national security voice. You might have to use your imagination a little bit. This goes fast, so it's a bit frenetic. Here goes. The way forward on Syria. Syria is still a source of strategic threats. United States will remain engaged to protect our national security. U.S. seeks 5 key objectives. ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria suffer an enduring defeat. Do not present a threat to the homeland. Do not resurface in a new form or safe haven for terrorists. The conflict between the Syrian people and the Assad regime is resolved through a UN-led political process. Iran's influence in Syria is diminished. Syria's neighbors are secure from all threats emanating from Syria. Refugees can begin to safely return to Syria. Syria is free of weapons of mass destruction. A stable, unified, independent Syria will serve U.S. national security and enable the Syrian people to attain their own God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So 5 steps to a completely new you. 5 steps to a completely new Syria. It is a kind of self-help marketing video. In any case, Tillerson's, this video notwithstanding, this 1 minute ad notwithstanding, this was a pretty major address. It was at the, Hoover Institution at Stanford University.
With Condoleeza Rice and George Shultz.
Oh, see that. So much for a new foreign policy.
Yeah. I don't think it's very forward. I think it's back to the Bush. I think Dick Cheney wrote this, to be honest, that speech.
Yeah.
Which we will. Should we go right into the speech, Dan?
Well, I guess the only saving grace I should say beforehand, before we go into it, is that let's just hope Trump doesn't listen to him. All right, let's go into the speech. Let's get this car wreck.
Alrighty. And all the links and everything are in the show notes. This speech is, I cut a lot out. So it's not the entire speech, but it's the meat of it. But I just want people to know that it's not verbatim, the speech, but you have links to the full speech and the transcripts in the show notes. I also should say that there are some audio glitches in this speech, and it's not us. It's the State Department put it out that way, which is also kind of interesting. But
we got no one working there. They've all quit.
Well, I guess Stanford, I don't know. Maybe Stanford doesn't have good Wi-Fi. All right.
So ironic.
Here's the first clip.
And the subject of my remarks today is to talk with you about the way forward for the United States in Syria. I'm going to start by giving you a kind of a broad historical and political context for what are some very difficult situations facing the Syrian people, and they raise concerns for all the international powers as well. Then I want to describe why it is crucial to our national defense to maintain a military and diplomatic presence in Syria to help bring an end to that conflict and assist the Syrian people as they chart a course to achieve a new political future. And then lastly, I want to detail the steps this administration is taking to achieve a stable, unified, and independent Syria, free of terrorist threats and free of weapons of mass destruction.
So that's the first clip.
Wait,
and I thought the notable thing...
Can we stop one moment and just say, this guy just called for a permanent military presence in Syria?
The thing that jumped out at me was, where'd the WMDs thing come from? And why is anybody in their right mind putting WMDs into their foreign policy goals? I mean, it immediately reminds you of the disaster that was the Iraq War, where they didn't find any WMDs. So I was shocked by that part.
It immediately reminds me of the fact that the only person who voluntarily gave them up besides Assad was Gaddafi, and the U.S. led a campaign to overthrow him where he was, raped with a baton and shot in the chest. So I'm not sure people want to collaborate on that goal.
Well, they don't have any nukes. I guess they're talking about chemical weapons, but hold on for a second. We already, there was already a program to remove all chemical weapons from Syria, from every part of Syria that the Assad government had control over and could remove. So I don't know what they're talking about with WMDs.
Oh, they're talking about those quote-unquote attacks that happened under Obama when they crossed the red line. Of course, I guess that was in response to that when they had the chemical weapons removed. And, of course, that quote-unquote attack that led to Trump bombing Syria, remember, under official policy, Trump's attacks came after a chemical weapons attack by the Assad government. Now, the fact that that's not been verified by anybody is neither here nor there. It is now the official position of the U.S. government that attack happened. So that's what Rex Tillerson's talking about.
And it just so happens that today he blamed the Syrian government for a chlorine attack in another story that doesn't hold up at all. But they just keep going back to that and back to that and back to that. I don't know. I'm quite baffled by it, to be honest.
I'm in no way baffled. That's exactly what's baffling about it. These people, this is the official line. They don't, the fact that there's no evidence for a lot of the things they're saying, that hasn't stopped them before.
Yeah, I know, but the story falls apart all the time.
Falls apart, but here's the important thing about shows like this and other independent media. Falls apart where? This speech apparently got a resounding ovation from the Washington Post editorial board. So they fall apart under scrutiny from, independent-minded people or free thinkers. The U.S. media hasn't ever pushed back on these narratives, the mainstream media, the corporate media. So, it falls apart. Nobody other people don't believe it. Other countries don't believe it. But I haven't seen any backtracking from anybody in the established media about these claims about Assad's, things that Assad has done, or these chemical weapon. Well, wait a minute. There was a chemical weapons inspection team, an international team. Didn't they remove these weapons? No. He hid them somewhere. There's all sorts of back and forth on this. I've yet to see anybody question the narrative other than maybe Seymour Hersh. I think I saw a piece, right? London Review of Books. Other than that, no mainstream publication has ever walked back a claim. So when Rex Tillerson gets up there and says something that's ridiculous, everybody who's not other people like us are like, what? No, a lot of that stuff's been knocked down. But it hasn't been with his audience even, right? He's with Condoleeza Rice. I don't think they've backtracked. So it's important for context that there is a bizarro parallel universe to the one we're living in which case, every chemical weapons attack that they've claimed has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's no doubt that the rebels themselves haven't used chemical weapons. Which has also been proved. So,
Yeah. And Tillerson laid out the whole shebang, the whole alternate reality in this speech. He really kind of collected it all into one place.
Let's get some more of it while I still have my little sanity left.
Here comes the next one.
For nearly 50 years, the Syrian people have suffered under the dictatorship of Hafez al-Assad and his son, Bashar al-Assad. nature of the Assad regime, like that of its sponsor, Iran, is malignant. It has promoted state terror. It has empowered groups that kill American soldiers, such as Al-Qaeda. It has backed Hezbollah and Hamas, and it has violently suppressed political opposition. Bashar al-Assad's grand strategy, to the extent he has one beyond his own survival, includes hosting some of the most radical terrorist elements in the region and using them to destabilize.
Sounds like us. Maybe we can't get along.
The regime is corrupt, and his methods of governance and economic development have increasingly excluded certain ethnic and religious groups.
That really sounds like us.
Notorious.
Okay, so there's the
right, where do you want to start with
evil boogeyman, the required evil boogeyman speech in the run up to every war. It seems we get one of these.
All right, so one. It's Iran. That's the official line too. Every problem that happens in the Middle East is Iran's fault. Okay. Secondly, I love the fact that he's blaming Al-Qaeda. He's associating Assad with Al-Qaeda when Al-Qaeda and the Al-Nusra Front and ISIS have been fighting him, and he's claiming they're helping Al-Qaeda when in fact, as has been demonstrated repeatedly, the U.S. weapons program, either intentionally or unintentionally, has supported literally the Al-Qaeda affiliate, the Al-Nusra Front. So it's projection on a scale that's comical.
Yeah, off the charts. Yeah, Al-Qaeda is fighting Assad with U.S. weapons, fighters trained by the U.S. I mean, they were, we've been through this a lot. I mean,
yeah.
All
right. You ready for the next part?
Let's keep going.
The Trump administration's counterterrorism policy is quite simple. It is to protect Americans at home and abroad from attacks by terrorists. Central to this policy is to deny terrorists and terrorist organizations the opportunity to organize, raise money, recruit fighters, train, plan, and execute attacks. In Syria today, we see the big picture. The situation characterized by Prince.
Oops, I went a little bit further than I intended.
That whole speech in my mind, I'm just seeing Trump with that orb with the Saudi king and the Egyptian president.
Yeah.
We're going to deny them places to organize and fund terrorism.
I mean, I'm seeing George Bush. I'm seeing Bush 43. I feel like total deja vu on this.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like the foreign policy Trump ran against.
And he's talking about denying terrorists weapons and training and all that. And, but again, we knowingly allowed weapons to fall into their hands. It's just so Orwellian, I guess you could say.
And we're partners. And he gave this big wet kiss to the Saudi king for anti-terrorism when we all know, thanks to WikiLeaks and of course just basic understanding of history, that the Saudis are the people who have been funding all these jihadists who are Sunni terrorists. For those who don't know, the idea that Assad and Iran are funding Sunni terrorists, the Al-Qaeda affiliate and other groups, is totally antithetical to their other claim, which is that there's a Shia crescent. So there's a Shia crescent and they're funding the Sunni jihadists? No, it's the Saudis and the Turks and UAE and for a time Qatar. So, I mean, like, their allies are the ones giving sanctuary and guns to these people. The very thing that they say their foreign policy is designed to stop, it's the thing the allies, their allies, key allies, are doing.
Have been doing or enabling, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just crazy.
Let's keep going. Fuck it.
In Syria today, we see the big picture. The situation characterized by principally three factors. ISIS is substantially, but not completely defeated. The Assad regime controls about half of Syria's territory and its population, and continued strategic threats to the U.S. from not just ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but others persist. And this threat I'm referring to is principally Iran.
Oh my God.
In short, Syria remains a source of severe strategic threats and a major challenge for our diplomacy.
Let's get something straight here. The principal threat to the United States, starting with 9/11 and going forward, has been from the Sunni jihadists, radical Islamic terrorists, whatever, that have been funded by the Saudis, right? 15 of the
and
19
other Gulf
hijackers,
states, yeah.
and the other Gulf states, the other Sunni Gulf states. The idea, the claim that the principal threat to the United States is from Iran is so ahistorical. First off, a lot of these people used to work with the Reagan administration who sold these people from Iran-Contra. But just like the idea, like, where is the terrorist attack from Iranian-backed on Americans and American assets from the Iranian-backed government? Oh, okay. Oh, they attacked us in Beirut in the 1980s. You mean when you were occupying Lebanon? When you were occupying territory in their backyard? Okay, fair enough. When's the last time after that? Oh, never. More importantly, when's the last time your friends' terrorist sponsor groups have attacked the United States? 9/11 going forward. The Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, right? All these threats that they keep justifying the Afghanistan and Iraq and other wars with. And now, suddenly, with no real background every story about Iran that these stories about is like how oppressive they are to their own people. Okay, fair enough and true enough, but what the hell does that mean they're a threat to the United States? Is the United States... I don't even understand what the logic is here. So once again, you've seen a total reframing of reality around U.S. policy interests, because the interest for the U.S. is Iran challenges U.S. and Israeli authority of the region, and they want to be calling the shots. And that's if you want to call that a threat, I guess they're a threat to U.S. dominance in the region, but I don't think that's a national security threat when you're invoking terms like terrorism.
No, he tried to box it into the standard war on terror narrative, but he does always mention "and our allies." So, but yeah, he's framing it all in the old Bush war on terror. They're falling back on that again. And by the way, using the same military authorization from Congress from 2001. So, they can't even get Congress to authorize a new war. So, it's crazy.
And wait a minute. Here's a good question that actually going forward. Would a war with Iran be consistent with the 2001 authorization of military force? Not that we're really within the rule of law anyway with this thing, but I'm just saying, does that covered? Would they actually have to get a new resolution, or is a war with Iran covered under that all expansive resolution passed 17 years ago?
Yeah. Well, really, a lot of people have argued that Syria, whatever we're doing in Syria, it doesn't.
Yeah. Wait a minute. That's another good point, Joanne. This guy's talking about a permanent occupation in Syria. Where is the resolution authorizing that?
Well, I guess that's why he's framing it in the war on terror. And, Al-Qaeda's there now. Let's not mention why Al-Qaeda's there or
let's not ask how they got there.
Yeah. I'll read some quotes from Paul Pilar's article later where he addresses that pretty well. He, summarizes it in like a paragraph. He really knocks that one out of the park. But all right, so now.
Oh, there's more, isn't there?
Oh, there's a lot more. There we go. I got the next one. He talks about the objectives.
In short, Syria remains a source of severe strategic threats and a major challenge for our diplomacy.
Wait a minute. Stop. Strategic threats to our diplomacy?
Yeah, he did say that.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, well, it does mean something. It means that they're very frustrated that the Geneva process is blocked over and over and over. And they wanted, the whole plan was to dictate the future of Syria via using the UN and the Geneva process and Staffan de Mistura.
Right. But that's like the hidden meaning. Like, what does that actually mean in terms of what he's trying to convey in a public speech?
Well, there are other, I've cut out a lot of pieces in here. There's a lot more sort of detail.
The strategic threat to our diplomacy? That's not even what does that even mean? Yeah, like, they make fun of us when we say things?
I don't know. You're asking me to answer what this guy means, and I think the whole thing's pretty crazy.
All right, let's just keep going.
To protect our own national security interest. The United States desires 5 key end states for Syria. First, ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria suffer an enduring defeat, do not present a threat to the homeland, and do not resurface in a new form. Syria never again serves as a platform or a safe haven for terrorists to organize, recruit, finance, train, and carry out attacks on American citizens at home or abroad or against our allies. Second, the underlying conflict between the Syrian people and the Assad regime is resolved through a UN-led political process prescribed in UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
Oh, he's got a number for it even.
Independent Syria under post-Assad leadership is functioning as a
post-Assad leadership, key phrase.
Iranian influence in Syria is diminished. Their dreams of a northern arch are denied.
The northern arch
are secure from all threats emanating from Syria.
Oh my God, the Saudis write this speech?
Conditions are created so that the refugees and IDPs can begin to safely and voluntarily return to Syria.
Threw that in
for European buy-in. They want European buy-in.
Is free of weapons of mass destruction.
There we go with WMDs.
The Trump administration is implementing a new strategy to achieve these end states. This process largely entails increased diplomatic action on the heels of our ongoing military successes. Our diplomatic efforts will be characterized by stabilization initiatives and a new emphasis on the political solution to the Syrian conflict.
Stabilization.
But let us be clear.
Listen,
the United States will maintain a military presence in Syria, focused on ensuring ISIS cannot reemerge. Our military mission in Syria will remain.
There's the pretext.
Conditions-based.
Cannot make the same mistakes that were made in 2011. When a premature departure from Iraq
there we go, this
allowed
again.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq to survive and eventually morph into ISIS. It was that vacuum that allowed ISIS and other terrorist organizations to wreak havoc on the country.
Oh, it only happened because we left.
A safe haven to plan attacks against Americans and our allies. We cannot allow history to repeat itself in Syria. ISIS presently has one foot in the grave. And by maintaining an American military presence in Syria until the full and complete defeat of ISIS is achieved, it will soon have two.
Boo. Soon have two. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Oh my Lord! First off, this is why these letting people tell false history really catches up with you.
Yeah.
False history now is that basically the only reason ISIS happened is because the U.S. left. Now, if you believe that, I don't like so. I guess you have to give an open-ended commitment. When the reality is, the reason ISIS formed up is because there was sectarian discrimination from Baghdad, and that led to a counter-revolt, and they rallied around ISIS, which had been a free-flowing group that had essentially, like Al-Qaeda, other places, other groups within the region, and they morphed together with the Sunni power base because the Sunnis felt like the Shia majority, represented by the government of Baghdad, was discriminating against them. Now, let's be clear. That's a government we installed.
Right.
That's the government we installed and promoted and funded and trained. And the only reason we got kicked out is because eventually the Iranians I guess that was their strategic threat to diplomatic interests, and the fact that Obama, sensing reality.
Bush negotiated the SOFA agreement, SOFA agreement. And there was just no way that the Iraqi government was going to.
Right. No, that's true. That's right.
Bush
negotiated status of forces agreement, and the Iraqi government, which was more closer to Iran and wasn't particularly enthused about Bush, basically said, "We don't want you here." Right.
And so, I think they said, well, the only way that you can have a continuing presence of U.S. troops in Iraq is if you allow U.S. troops if you allow Iraq to prosecute troops for any.
That was a deal breaker.
They knew that we would never agree to that. So
that was a poison pill.
Yeah. But they pinned it on Obama, and they use this, especially with Syria, but also for other situations. But they use this false, I don't know what you call it, but they use this ruse all the time. And I think that there's an article by Paul Pilar called A New Decision to Go to War in Syria, and there's a link in the show notes. But I thought he summarized pretty well about this. He said, quote, Tillerson tried to make a case for an extended U.S. mission, partly by resurrecting the now familiar assertion that the United States had made a, quote, premature departure, unquote, of its troops from Iraq several years ago. As with other times this assertion has come up, the secretary did not mention that the group that became ISIS did not exist prior to any U.S. troops entering Iraq, and that the group emerged as a direct result of the U.S. invasion and the ensuing internal war. Nor did Tillerson address how a continued modest troop presence could have done what an earlier U.S. military presence in Iraq of 160,000 troops could not do. Nor did he address how George W. Bush administration, which negotiated the troop withdrawal agreement, could have done anything substantially different in the face of a strong Iraqi government resistance to extending U.S. military presence, unquote. I thought he kind of knocked that out in one paragraph. He knocked that down really well. And but it does not stop them from using this. And if you keep saying it, it becomes reality in a lot of people's minds, you know.
And then stabilization, that key phrase, is not like meaning stability, meaning, okay, we're going to get out of here and let them resolve their own conflicts and have a stable society. Stabilization is a permanent U.S. presence constantly interfering. I mean, this is...
I think stabilization means a government that will do what we tell it to do.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what imperialism is. It's client states, and that's what the U.S. wants. And of course, that's why they say post-Assad, because Assad won't take orders from them, and they want to install somebody who will.
And by the way, fork over all your natural resources to Western corporations. Also.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's part of liberalization.
Stabilization.
Stabilization is finding the government that'll do what we tell them to do. Liberalization is opening your country up to economic penetration from U.S. companies.
Economically liberal, yeah.
Yeah, liberalization. That's what Paul Bremer was all about when he became viceroy of Iraq after the invasion. He was, we're just going to liberalize everything and de-Ba'athify. But in any case, I mean, the real question here from all this, is this the end of the speech so we can move on?
No, there's some more.
All right. Stuff. Anyway, there's more importantly, going forward, the way forward is the real question is one that Elijah brought up not so many shows ago, which is, are the regional powers going to accept a U.S. presence in Syria? Or are they going to drive the U.S. out?
No, and if they're not going to.
Well, but see, now that's this. You have to think of it from.
I mean, they're not going to accept.
But you have to think of this. No. But you have to think of this from the U.S.'s perspective, which is they want a war with Iran. Now, if they stay,
or at the very least, a proxy war, yeah.
No, they want a direct war. They're not going to get a proxy war. There's no force in the. This is why he talks about the North Arc. He talks about which is like the Shia Crescent, kind of. They know no one else in the region can stand up to Iran, including Israel. So it has to be the U.S. So what's a good way to start a war with Iran? Put your troops all over places where Iran doesn't want you and hope that Iran strikes first.
Put your troops, yeah.
So this is an attempt. This is yet another backhanded or backway attempt to start a war with Iran. They're going to kill the nuclear deal, and then they're going to get more aggressive in Syria, more aggressive on the border, more aggressive against Iranian Shia militias or Iranian-backed Shia militias, more aggressive against Hezbollah. There's already been a big article about how Hezbollah is responsible for drug trafficking and the Obama administration didn't do anything. So they're going to keep getting more and more aggressive with Iran and hope that Iran strikes first, which will open the door to a war. And that's what permanent presence in Syria is all about. They don't even care about Assad. It's not about controlling Syria. It's about controlling Iran. And this is how they're going to get their war. This is one of the tactics. So that's what Tillerson's really doing here. That's the geopolitical positioning. They're putting U.S. troops in a very sensitive way. They're going to start getting physical with groups aligned with Iran and hope that Iran gives them the pretext to start a war.
Yeah, I think that could be some people's objectives. I'm not convinced that Tillerson has that objective, but, Tillerson.
What else is he talking about then? What else is he talking about? What is the strategic interest of the U.S. in Syria, if not to counter Iranian influence, which basically he said.
I agree with that completely.
What's he talking about then?
Well, I was just addressing the part where you said that we're trying to spark a hot war with Iran, directly, U.S. and Iran at war. I don't think that Tillerson.
Ideally, Iran will just do what we say. I mean, that's the ideal. I should be clear. They're setting it up to put incredible pressure on Iran to make Iran do what the U.S. wants. In theory, Iran could just completely capitulate, and that would serve them. That would protect them from Iranian threats to diplomatic operations, whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. But we both know that. But Iran is not going to kiss the ring.
No, they're not. They're getting them from a couple angles too. The sanctions, and he'll get into that a little bit here.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, I'm not disagreeing with you at all that there are people who want a hot war with Iran. I mean, we know that. If we accept that Wes Clark's 7 countries in 5 years speech, which I do, I don't think he was lying about that at all. I think that's pretty much gospel at this point. So we know that Iran's been in the crosshairs.
But it's not even, forget the Pentagon for a second, which is what Wes Clark's talking about. Look at the people around Trump. Look at all these Likudniks and connected to Netanyahu,
fanatic
Jared Kushner, and these other, his ambassador to Israel, the move to Jerusalem as the capital. I mean, he has some hardcore Zionists around him, and those people see Iran as the key national security existential threat to Israel. So don't put it. It's not just the Pentagon has a security outlook. You have people in the White House directly working with the president, who he's enthralled with, and probably the president himself, who want Iran out of the picture. That's the last hurdle for total Israeli domination. They've already made their peace with the Gulf states, and they see Iran as the key bulwark against whatever their sense of security interest. So you've got serious Likudnik influence within the White House. You do have this pre-existing geopolitical strategy from the Pentagon and the neocons of old. So, I mean, look at who's there. I mean, this is what they want. So it's not, I don't think it's, I'm sure there's some people who are just like, they're not against the idea. They're just realists and go, we can't pull this off. Iran is not Iraq. They're not going to just fold. It's going to be really hard to take them out. And not to mention the fact that they could strike us back, and who the hell knows what happens then. So, but the interest is in, I mean, look, if Iran just, bends the knee, if all this pressure and all these sanctions and everything, that makes them, respect, do business with Israel and gives the U.S. carte blanche in the region, then I guess there wouldn't be a war. But first of all, Iran is on the ascendancy. They've got the sanctions off. They're doing business with Europe right now. The Iranian nuclear deal is a done deal for everyone else but the Trump administration. That should be made clear. This ship has sailed.
Right.
They're already integrated into the world economy now, much more so than they ever have been. They're doing multi-billion-dollar business deals with other governments. They're not under UN sanctions anymore.
Well, they are still. Well, anyway, we don't want to get too much into the details. It really didn't lift that many sanctions.
They lifted enough
for foreign investment, and
enough for foreign investment. I mean, not enough to
quell oil business, right? So
the Iranians, not enough to quell reformers in Iran who are upset with the distribution of wealth. But this is not so.
But your main point, though, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think the only reason that the Iran deal happened, I think Obama knew that the sanctions weren't going to hold up. I mean, there's already all kinds of black markets around it, but they just were getting pressured by the European allies. Interestingly, I'm not sure that is as strong as I thought it was, based on a Moon of Alabama post. And this is really another subject, the whole Iran. Why is Iran enemy number one now? Like that's a complicated topic in itself. But I think Europe, I'm not quite as confident that Europe will, insist on continuing. I'm just not quite, I'm a little shaky on how strong Europe is on continuing the Iran deal. But in the past, I have thought that, like you said, a done deal, and they've already made some investments.
They're not going to break it. How about this? They're not going to break it for Trump.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Okay, so the Europeans are not going to break their deal, which is giving them billions of dollars and access to some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world for Trump.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to remember, too, this is all still rooted in countries, wanting to sell their natural gas and oil to Europe. Europe is short on energy. And,
That's everybody's the opposition to Russia, too.
Yeah, everybody's trying to get their pipeline and their
liquefied natural gas, which is talk about a freaking workaround that's unnecessary. But in any case, all right, let's go. What? There's more of this.
Yeah, there's a lot
more of this speech. God help us.
Unfortunately, there's a lot more. All right, let me get this started again.
We understand that some Americans are skeptical of continued involvement in Syria.
Yeah.
Question the benefits of maintaining a presence in such a troubled country. However, it is vital for the United States to remain engaged in Syria for several reasons. Ungoverned spaces, especially in conflict zones, are breeding grounds for ISIS and other terrorist organizations. Fight against ISIS is not over. There are bands of ISIS fighters who are already beginning to wage an insurgency. And our allies will hunt them down and kill them or capture them.
While they're fighting Turkey.
We must persist in Syria to thwart al-Qaeda, which still has a substantial presence and base of operations in northwest
Thanks to
Syria.
us.
As in the years before 9/11, al-Qaeda is eager to create a sanctuary to plan and launch attacks on the West. Although ISIS is the terrorist group that has dominated the headlines most in the last few years, al-Qaeda is still a grave threat and is looking to reconstitute in new and powerful ways.
They've even got new American weapons.
Additionally, a total withdrawal of American personnel at this time would restore Assad and continue his brutal treatment.
Restore? He's still in charge.
A murder of his own people cannot generate the trust required for long-term stability. Stable, unified, and independent Syria ultimately requires post-Assad leadership in order to be successful.
Independent of who?
U.S. presence to ensure the lasting defeat of ISIS will also help pave the way for legitimate local civil authorities to exercise responsible governance of their liberated areas. Departure of Assad through the UN-led Geneva process will create the conditions for a durable peace within Syria and security along the borders for Syria's neighbors.
All right, so, he gets to the point there, which is, look, our Geneva process is the one that's going to decide the future of Syria, and the Saudis are insisting that Assad must go. So they, he's flip-flopped on Assad must go, or
oh my God,
Assad maybe doesn't have to go.
Flip-flopped again. I mean, this is like
Assad must go, but later, but it never stops.
Are the Saudis? What about the real discussions? The real discussions are with Russia and Turkey, and
that's the thing.
Is Saudi Arabia even part of those discussions?
The Saudi-led, there's a rebel group, Saudi-backed rebels. There's a high negotiating committee, I think they're called.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I think they started out going to Astana, and then I think they stormed out and backed out. I can't really tell you whether they are participating right now or not.
Is the U.S. finally joined this, or is the U.S. still out?
I think the U.S. has an observer. I think the U.S. did not want to join, but they do observe. You know what? My information on this is old. I haven't checked. But here's the thing that's what he doesn't mention. I don't think he mentions it at all in this speech. In addition to Astana, which is Turkey, Iran, and Russia, basically backing away from the Geneva process because they hit a roadblock with the United States and the Saudis and the opposition. So they started their Astana process, and Astana was they were dividing things into smaller tasks, like getting de-escalation zones, things like that. And they've been they've been moving along, and the de-escalation zones are guaranteed by Turkey and Russia. I think that's how they do it. So they actually, put people in these regions. They take the reports of the violations. They enforce the ceasefire, if you will. But the real freak out, I think, is about the upcoming Sochi summit. There's and again, this is enough for a whole nother episode of its own, but there is a big thing coming along. It's a sort of Congress, and they intend to decide on a constitution. They intend to make some big decisions about the future of Syria. And if I'm not wrong, the Kurds are involved in this as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the date was uncertain for a while, but I think the current date, let me just look it up. And now it says Syrian Kurds will likely not attend Russia's Sochi Congress. Okay, so they were invited, and interesting, because the Kurds have been complaining, rightfully so, that they were not involved in any of these talks and where these decisions are being made. And I think Russia went to great lengths to get them involved in this event, and now they might not go. That would be sad, actually. Syrian Kurds will likely not attend Russia's Sochi Congress. Syrian Kurds,
they're going to be fighting Turkey anyway. But okay, what the larger point about this whole thing is that
the Sochi Congress is the thing.
Right, it's maneuvering the U.S. out of the position of power.
Geneva is irrelevant at this point. Astana made it irrelevant to some extent, but it wasn't as far-reaching. It wasn't such a high-level type of negotiation. The Sochi thing is, and I mean, they know that something's big's going to happen at this, and I can't help but think that that's the reason why Tillerson came out with this speech and this policy at this time. Probably in February. That's what they said in December. When is this thing? Later this month or in February. So I don't know whether the date has been set or not, but it's going to be soon. So I just want to make that point.
U.S. disengagement from Syria would provide Iran the opportunity to further strengthen its position in Syria. The United States, along with its allies and partners, will undertake the following steps to bring stability and peace to Syria. First, stabilization initiatives in liberated areas are essential to making sure that life can return to normal and ISIS does not reemerge. Stabilization initiatives consist of essential measures, such as clearing unexploded landmines left behind by ISIS, allowing hospitals to reopen, restoring water services, and getting boys and girls back in school.
As if they're doing this all over the country. Instead of one little part.
Millions of Iraqis have returned to their homes. In Syria, however, unlike in Iraq, we do not have a national government partner for stabilization.
The great example of Iraq, the sea on the shining sea.
Stabilization is not a synonym for open-ended nation building or
yes, it is
reconstruction, but it is essential. No party in the Syrian conflict is capable of victory or stabilizing the country via military means alone. Our military presence,
I don't know about that.
The State Department and USAID teams
My lying eyes.
are already working with local authorities to help liberated peoples stabilize their own communities. Simultaneous with stabilization efforts,
they're stabilizing themselves.
Is also a critical step to creating the conditions for a post-Assad political settlement.
Post-Assad.
Since July, the United States has worked with Russia and Jordan to establish the de-escalation area in the southwest part of Syria. It has achieved a ceasefire, ended indiscriminate bombing of civilian populations, and with some few exceptions has thus far held up well. The agreement in the southwest also addresses Israel's security by requiring Iranian-backed militias, most notably Hezbollah, to move away from Israel's border. We need Russia to continue to work.
Israel's ever-expanding border that aren't fixed.
continuation of de-escalation efforts, not just in the Southwest, but elsewhere. On counterterrorism, we will continue to work with allies and partners, such as Turkey, to address the terror threat in Idlib and address Turkey's concern with PKK terrorists elsewhere.
Oh, PKK, the Kurds are terrorists again.
In the face of Operation for itself in Idlib, we are actively developing the best option to neutralize this threat in conjunction with allies and partners. The United States is vigorously supporting UN efforts to achieve the political solution under UN Security Council Resolution 2254. This is the political framework for peace and stability in a unified Syria, which has already been agreed upon by members of the UN Security Council. Specifically, we will work through what is known as the Geneva process.
Yeah. So, yeah, he goes through. And also, we should note that Mike Pence is over in the Middle East, or maybe he returned, but he just did a sweep through the Middle East. And Paul Ryan now just went over. I don't know what is going on.
Tweedledum and Tweedledummer.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, let's just listen to this like rhetoric. I mean, this is regime change, neocon 101. They want to dominate the region. They want the person who's in power out, and they want to have their person installed, and it all in the name of stability, quote unquote, and anti-terrorism. And it's the same old game. And this was supposed to be, obviously it isn't, but it was supposed to be a new day. And it's the same under Trump, right? Trump ran as, we're not going to do this. Trump ran as this America First guy, and he's back playing the same old dumbass games, which will have, of course, the same results. I mean, it's these interventions, these stability projects that got us to the current state of affairs. Oh, the U.S. hasn't been active enough. The U.S. has been incredibly active. That's how you got the status quo is a result of U.S. stability operations. Okay, that's how we got here. So the idea that more of that is going to reverse the problem is, I mean, it's the definition of insanity at this point. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yeah, I mean, there's really we're fighting two different wars in Syria. We have the military anti-ISIS coalition, and they seem pretty determined to stick to the anti-ISIS mission, although now, of course, this is changing. But then you have the CIA.
Joanne, real quick, Joanne, before you...
Yeah.
He just called PKK a terrorist group. PKK is in the YPG group that he wants to fight ISIS with him. They're in the allies and coalition. The group
you're supposed to pretend that's not true.
Oh, okay, we'll continue.
Yeah. I think we're supposed to pretend that's not the case.
Well, Turkey isn't pretending that's not the case. They just launched a war.
Yeah.
Launched another invasion of Syria to fight the YPG, which are the quote unquote. So anyway, continue.
Anyway, let's continue. Here he talks a little about Russia.
The regime clearly looks to Russia as a guarantor of its security. Russia, therefore, has a meaningful role to play in persuading the Assad structurally in the Geneva process. Russia's own vote to support UNSCR 2254, President Putin reaffirmed Russia's commitment to Geneva in his joint statement with President Trump issued from Da Nang, Vietnam last November.
So there again, you can't do this Sochi thing. You got to come back to Geneva and you got to do it at our table. Even though we tried and failed that so many times. And then finally, the big agreement that we had, I think it was September of 2015 or 2016, when, we had an agreement with Russia to separate Al-Qaeda from the rebels. And there was a ceasefire put in place. And the agreement was that if the ceasefire was in place for X number of days, then the U.S. and Russia would start cooperating militarily. And about day 5, we mistakenly bombed and killed 100 Syrian troops in Deir ez-Zor. Somebody sabotaged the deal, in other words, in Geneva. And at that point, Russia and Syria, I think, just disengaged from the Geneva process. I think they decided, they had tried numerous times, and, they didn't believe. I think Lavrov at that time said, who's in charge here? And that's when they initiated going off and doing their own process. So, but there's a panic going on that the Geneva process, even though it has already been pretty irrelevant for a while now, that it's going to be really done if this Sochi Congress happens. And, a new constitution of Syria is adopted and various groups agree, so it's more of that. And I also find it very interesting the way he addresses Russia. And he sort of pretends that there isn't a new Cold War and that American news isn't dominated every single day with anti-Russian, propaganda and just crazy level of antagonism and xenophobia toward Russia. He just puts it in his speech as if, first of all, like dictating to Russia, saying, Russia has a role to play. Really? Okay, well, yeah, thanks.
What role do you?
Thanks so much.
Russia's role to play. Russia is a major participant, and there by the invitation of the official government. What role does the U.S. have to play? That's the real question. I mean,
yeah, it's this empire fantasy going on.
Russia should participate in the process we control and the process we have a stake in, and the process we have a lot of influence in, if it wants to be relevant. Actually, it doesn't have to. And nor does Iran, nor does anybody. Nobody has to play your game anymore. And in fact, the president said he wasn't going to play these games anymore. So, piss off.
I think he's also maybe addressing, there are a lot of people, prominent people, who have real concerns that continued military operations in Syria is going to spark a war with Russia. Because eventually there are going to be accidents. Things are going to happen, and they're going to clash. So,
is this over? Is this speech over yet?
No.
All right, let's keep going. My God, how many lies can I listen to in one night?
The United States, the EU, and regional partners will not provide international reconstruction assistance to any area under control of the Assad regime.
Says who?
Stakeholders in Syria's future to do the same. We will discourage economic relationships between the Assad regime and any other country. Instead, we will encourage international assistance to rebuild areas the global coalition and its local partners have liberated from ISIS.
Oh my God, it's a Cold War. It's a Cold War within Syria.
The United States will gladly encourage the normalization of economic relationships between Syria and other nations.
So basically, no money until Assad's gone, and pretending that they can't reconstruct.
Oh no, you didn't
Syria
understand that part. That last little part there is they're gonna pour money in so much. Remember we said there was no nation building?
Yeah,
he literally just said that. They're going to pour money into the places under "quote unquote" liberated control, and they're going to try to show those places as so much more prosperous that the Syrian people are going to throw out Assad so they can get some of that redevelopment money. This is literally what he just said he's going to do. Which one is nation building, and two is like a little mini Cold War, East and West Berlin, within freaking Syria.
Yeah, break off from Assad, and you'll get lots of reconstruction cash. Which always means contracts and all kinds of, oh my God, great.
Well, we're going to build these palaces and, where ISIS used to be, or these just beautiful places, well funded. And you're going to see that. And none of the Assad controlled areas can get that money until Assad's gone.
Well, the thing is, China is all in on the Syrian reconstruction. Iran and Russia too, but China's the one who's ready to put money into it.
He just claimed Europe was with him, and I think that's bullshit.
I really wonder myself.
And I think it's bullshit. I think the Europeans will do business with Assad if push comes to shove, and they're in risk of being boxed out of the region because they won't do business with Assad, and China will. I think they'll do business.
Yeah, I read a policy paper from Germany. They are seriously interested in investing in Syria. All right, so that's the reconstruction part. Also, he doesn't mention that Syria is already under sanctions. We already have sanctions on them. They can't get medicine. I mean, and sanctions always hurt the little guy. They always hurt the civilians who he claims to be, he's doing all this for our American security and the well-being of Syrians, and it's just there's just so much misleading information. It's just it's not new.
Let's the bullshit train keep going. What else does he have to say?
254 also calls for UN-supervised free elections in Syria.
Oh, fuck yourself.
The United States believes that free and transparent elections, to include the participation of the Syrian diaspora who have been displaced, all those who were forced to flee the conflict, will result in the permanent departure of Assad and his family from power. This process will take time, and we urge patience in the departure of Assad and the establishment of new leadership.
I mean, all right. No, I'm not going to. Don't stop it. Let's keep going. But I mean,
now he's going to get to SDF and Turkey a little bit.
I mean, all right. If we're going to another part, let's just say this clearly. This guy wants a diplomatic process that's precondition is Assad has to go. This has been the position since 2011 for the United States and Israel, and the answer has been a definitive no. 500,000 people have been killed to hear this answer no again, and that's what he's starting with again. He's starting with the 2011 position that happened before the Syrian civil war really kicked off. This is how out of fucking touch this guy is.
How they never change.
He's right where he was.
Policy.
They haven't moved once. They haven't moved 1 inch from 2011, and meanwhile, the entire Syrian civil war has been fought and mostly won by the Assad regime in coordination, Assad government in coordination with Russia and Iran. It's over, and they're saying, no. We know we sponsored these proxy forces that got their asses beaten, and we know that we've been, terrorism, and we know that we've been insisting on this, and we know we've been defeated on the field of battle, and we know all the rest of it, but we still want to say we're going to decide what we wanted to decide, in 2011. Yeah. I mean, this is bizarro world.
Yeah, it is.
These guys are not living in reality, and of course everyone's going to tell them to go fuck themselves.
Yeah, pretty much. But they can still cause a lot of trouble. And anyway, here's where he starts getting into the Kurds and Turkey.
Recognizes and honors the great sacrifices the Syrian democratic forces have made in liberating Syrians from ISIS. But its victories on the battlefield do not solve the challenge of local governance and representation for people of eastern and northern Syria. Interim local political arrangements that give voice to all groups and ethnicities supportive of Syria's broader political transition must emerge with international support. Any interim arrangements must be truly representative and must not threaten any of Syria's neighboring states. Similarly, the voices of Syrians from these regions must be heard in the broader discussion about Syria's future. On these points, the United States hears and takes seriously the concerns of our NATO ally, Turkey. We recognize the humanitarian contributions and military sacrifices Turkey has made towards defeating ISIS, towards their support of millions of Syrian refugees, and stabilizing areas of Syria it has helped liberate. We must have Turkey's close cooperation in achieving a new future for Syria that ensures security for Syria's neighbors.
Yeah. Just solve nothing, right? He's basically saying
their neighbors. Oh my God.
So he thanks the SDF. He says the United States recognizes and honors the great sacrifices the Syrian democratic forces have made. This is directed to the Kurds. And then there's the big but. But its victories on the battlefields don't solve the challenge of local governance and the representation for people of eastern and northern Syria. Interim local political arrangements that give voice to all groups and ethnicities supportive of Syria's broader political transition must emerge with international support. Any interim arrangements must be truly representative and must not threaten any of Syria's neighboring states. Similarly, the voices of Syrians from these regions...
Which, of course, means they can't be aligned with Iran, which is what he's always been... Which is what he's saying. Okay, because if they're aligned with Iran, that threatens Israel.
I think he's talking about Kurdish regions on Turkey's border here.
He's talking about... in that case he is. In the other case, he's talking about... He's trying to have it 20 different ways with Turkey, which is... I mean, I don't understand. Is he backing this latest? This is before the current invasion from Turkey of, I guess, northern Syria. But what does this even mean then? If he's not saying, because Turkey feels absolutely threatened in their borders if there's independent Kurdish groups, as they've demonstrated. So what does this mean?
Well, I think he's saying, it sure sounds like he's saying that the Kurds can't have a Kurdish-led state on Turkey's border.
Yeah, but they don't have one now, and Turkey's already. I mean, it's not a Turkey. They don't. The Turkey is not worried about an independent Kurdistan so much as they are Kurdish power generally. I mean, they've sent forces in. There's no Kurdish state now. There's no even plans for a Kurdish state to be recognized, and they just sent tanks and guns in to Afrin. So clearly, they don't see the threat in this kind of weird legalistic. Well, do they have an independent state? They see.
Yeah, Turkey's completely freaking out about the fact that we announced, a longer presence and the creation of a 30,000 strong border force,
which includes Kurds who are connected to PKK.
Yeah, I mean that's why they moved on Afrin. That was their reaction, or at least that's my understanding of it. So he doesn't solve anything here. He just basically acknowledges that the Kurds and Turkey are our allies. And he throws out a vague warning, but he doesn't offer any solution that I can see.
Extremely vague. I mean, so vague. It's basically like, I'm acknowledging this is a problem, but I'm offering no guidance whatsoever on what we're going to do about it.
Yeah. So there's two more sections on stabilization, and then his humdinger of a finish. So here's his talk on stabilization.
Finally, reducing and expelling malicious Iranian influence from Syria depends on a democratic.
He buried the lead.
For many years, Syria under Bashar al-Assad has been a client state of Iran. The Syrian central government,
we wanted to make client state of us.
Assad will have new legitimacy to assert its authority over the country.
Oh, are we doing this democratization crap again?
Sovereignty by a new government, along with de-escalation efforts and new flows of international aid, will lower violence,
money,
better conditions for stability, and speed up the departure of foreign fighters.
Okay. What is he saying here?
Complexities. Our proposed solutions will not be easy to achieve. But
no, they won't.
Proceed
because they won't happen.
Think of our security and that of our allies. We will not repeat the mistakes of the past in Iraq, nor will we repeat
you clearly will.
In Libya. Well-intentioned military interventions, independent of stabilization and political strategies, give rise to a host of adverse unintended consequences. For this reason, we seek to de-escalate the civil war in Syria, work for peace, and encourage all parties to head to the negotiating table. Continued fighting will likely lead to worsened humanitarian conditions, more chaos, and increased regional military intervention in Syria. Our focus is to build a positive political path forward that honors the will of the Syrian people and sustains the unity and territorial integrity of Syria.
The will of the Syrian people.
Yeah, so first of all, I think here's my short version of what I think you just said. Yes, we're going back to neoconservative foreign policy of the Bush era. And no, it wasn't a failure. It was only a failure because we didn't stay to stabilize. It's, again, that's not new either, but, that's what he's trying to throw out there.
The surge worked, Joanne.
Surge worked. They're bankrupt. Yeah. And again, with the Geneva process, again, showing that there's a freak out to undermine the Sochi process. I don't see how they're going to undermine the Sochi process unless, well, anyway, I guess there are ways they could, but. And finally, here's his ending salvo.
Finally, the Syrian people have endured 7 years of unimaginable chaos and hardship. They need help. A new course of action is a preferable alternative to more years of wishful thinking. A stable, unified, independent Syria will serve the national security interest of the United States, its allies, and our partners. If that reality can come to pass, it will be a victory for all. And it will support the ability of the Syrian people to pursue their own God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So
they want to be Americans.
says, do it our way, and it'll be a victory for all. That's.
In other words, inside every Syrian is an American trying to get out.
That too, yeah.
That is the speech. It is inside every Syrian, and there's an American trying to get out.
Well, he knows,
and therefore we should promote democracy and stability, or whatever the new catchphrase is, because then we're going to win. I mean, this is so stupid and ridiculous, and this is a total disaster. And you're conflicted because we love our own troops and we love our soldiers, but on the other hand, like, how can you not understand that the people in this region are going to try to drive the U.S. forces out, and they're going to do that violently? And it's not the soldiers' fault, but it's like you're putting these soldiers in the middle. They have no legitimate reason to be in Syria. None. And now you're going to put them there permanently, and they're going to get attacked and killed. And it's like, and it's not even right.
The only legitimate reason that he stated might be to root out Al-Qaeda. I mean, Al-Qaeda is the strongest fighting force.
Oh, bullshit. But that's bullshit, because if we were trying to stop Al-Qaeda,
I agree, it's bullshit, but it's the only one
we'd be invading Saudi Arabia if we were trying to stop Al-Qaeda.
Right. I think it's the only one that makes any real sense.
But it doesn't. But even that one doesn't, really.
Yeah. No, it does. The reality of the situation. I'm talking about the alternate reality for a second. Shifted to alternate reality for a second. He's saying, but there's Al-Qaeda there, and we're going to help get them out of it. But what he doesn't.
How's that working, by the way? Because it's been, since 2001, the war on terror. Has it reduced Al-Qaeda? Because actually, there's more Al-Qaeda members today than there were prior to 9/11.
You have to also forget that David Petraeus and many others, but Petraeus is the one that put himself out where he actually recommends allying with Al-Qaeda in Syria. So,
I forgot about that.
You have to bury a lot of things for anybody to buy.
That's a very deep memory hole to be quote 1984. You really have to put a lot in there.
Yeah. So I think, again, going back to Paul Pilar, he knocks this down too. He says, besides helping to prolong war and instability in Syria, the course Tillerson describes as a prescription for increased trouble within real alliances. He said, we must have Turkey's close cooperation in achieving a new future for Syria, without mentioning how the client arming scheme in northern Syria is anathema to the Turks. So now Syria may become the theater for a proxy war between two members of NATO. I mean, it's a really, really mess. So nothing that
proxy war between two members of NATO. Do you remember this story, Joanne, when the CIA-backed rebels were fighting the Pentagon-backed rebels in Syria?
Yeah, I do.
Proxy war within the U.S. government.
Yeah, I think there are some more recent examples of that too. So, and just to summarize, let me read one more paragraph from Pilar. This is how he begins the article. He says, behind a facade of continuity, the deployment of U.S. armed forces in Syria for the purposes that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson described in a speech this week represents a departure from what such forces were originally sent to Syria to do. The Trump administration is having U.S. troops participate indefinitely in someone else's civil war for reasons that are quite different from the original stated objective of helping to quash the so-called caliphate of the Islamic State, ISIS or IS. The new reasons do not stand up to scrutiny in terms of defending any threatened U.S. interests. The administration has, in effect, made a decision to immerse the United States in yet another foreign war. And I completely agree with that. Although I have my doubts that there is that strong a commitment to, this is all being done through proxies. We still don't have a significant troop presence over there. I mean, there's some thousands, but not enough to change the game. So
that's the best scenario, though, by the way, which is that this is all posturing and they're not actually making a commitment to anything, and that when push comes to shove, the U.S. is just going to cut and run.
We hope.
No, but I'm saying, no. I'm saying that's the best option, is that this is posturing, because it's that really stupid.
I agree.
But that's what we hope, is that like they're banging the drum real loud, and then when push comes to shove and these militias and everybody else starts kicking the crap out of the U.S. proxies, or Turkey might wipe out a good fair enough of the Kurds, and all this rest of this is destroyed, and Assad takes back most of the country, that all this is just dumb posturing that was never going to go anywhere, because the alternative is a real serious clash where U.S. forces are once again stuck in the middle of a total quagmire with people getting killed left and right and no end in sight.
Yeah, or some, as you mentioned before, some event that gets people angry enough to go along with deploying a large number of troops. And the longer you stay in the battlefield near Iranian and Russian troops, the higher the chances of something like that happening. Plus, as you mentioned, one of our interviews with Elijah, he said that what will happen is if the U.S. insists on occupying part of Syria, several different forces in the region, they're going to slowly, there's going to be an insurgency and there's going to be war. So it's just
right. And plus, refusal. I think well, here's the other thing about this war with Iran. Does Trump have the ability to really make it stick? I mean, that's the other thing. I don't know what happens if Trump starts a war with Iran. I mean, a war with North Korea would be rather quick. It would go nuclear. In fact, it will probably go nuclear quickly. I think it's probably going to be, if it does happen, it's going to be a very quick nuclear war, which of course would be incredibly devastating to everybody involved.
Yes.
And horrible loss of life, but it'll be quick. A war with Iran, I mean, that is a major commitment. I don't even know how you could do that without reinstituting the draft, because there's not enough soldiers in the current military. I mean, that would take a major mobilization. Does Trump have enough political capital? Does the American people? I mean, I think it's, I really think when push comes to shove, I'm not sure even attempting a war with Iran doesn't snap. That might be the definition of imperial overstretch.
I have a hard time believing that the U.S. military would agree to a large-scale war with Iran. I mean, not that they are allowed to decide, but they can certainly, especially now, they're all the generals in the White House. But I don't think.
Well, I mean, maybe the generals are crazy enough. I don't know, to support it, but I just think, or maybe they're not. But I think what are the generals going to do when Iranian-backed forces, militias, hit and run groups, whatever little gang, even street gangs, or whoever gets. I mean, if it's not an official Iranian hand, it's kind of proxy stuff. What are they going to do if they start killing U.S. troops?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and it worries me a lot. What it comes down to is, again, it's the empire refusing to admit that they, in this particular situation, they can't dictate the outcome, but they completely refuse to accept that. And the Saudis and the Israelis, the two major backers of this, or you could even say motivators of this new announced policy, they won't back down either. They can't accept it either.
Well, but here's the thing. This is why this is so dangerous. The U.S. gets in Iran's face, which is what a permanent presence does, and starts trying to dictate terms, and Iran responds. The U.S. then, even people who are against this war, are going to be in a position where we're going to say, Jesus Christ, if we fucking get killed by some Iranian groups in Syria and Iraq or wherever, we cannot, in the face of this nuclear deal and the rest of our rhetoric, just turn tail and run. We have to double down. And then you're in the Vietnam dynamic. Or you're in a general war. Either you're going to say, no, we need even more troops in Syria to protect the troops we have already, and that escalates. Right? They're going to escalate. That's what I mean. Like exactly. They put themselves in a position where they cannot get out. Because getting out is a total surrender, quote unquote, to Iran. And by the way, they kind of, in a weird sense, would have a point. If the U.S. puts permanent forces in there and the Iranian militias come in and kill enough of them to drive them out, then Iran is the master of the Middle East in a very real way. So it's actually, they're setting themselves up for a dynamic where they just can't leave, and they have to escalate in response. And that escalation process it's a death spiral. There's no way out once it starts. That's why permanent forces. I mean, Iran is not going to tolerate this.
Well, the other thing that we didn't really talk about was going back to the orb ceremony in Saudi Arabia. Trump and the infamous orb. Everybody knows what I mean. What they were announcing at that point was that they were going to create a giant counterterrorism army, weren't they? And of course, this was the original plan for Syria. There was supposed to be a Sunni.
They're going to create the FSA again. How many times can they create the FSA?
I do think that's what's going.
Well, you missed a news report. There was a news report that said, and Reuters bought it because they're idiots. It said the Free Syrian Army has committed 50,000 troops to Operation Olive Branch, the Turkish invasion of northern Syria.
I gotta love that name.
50,000. Does anybody even think there are 50,000 Free Syrian Army soldiers, let alone ones that are going to line up behind the Turkish military? I mean, it's pure propaganda, and Reuters totally bought it.
Remember Charles Lister said there were 70,000? And then he got torn apart for that.
Did he get paid by all 70,000? They did crowdfunding?
Well, Tillerson, he mentions patience, and this is going to take a long time. And
but that's the thing. They're not going to tolerate it for long. Patience is wearing thin. And what happened? That's what I mean. They're setting up, even people who are like, if you said to them right now in the Pentagon, would you be for a war with Iran? Say, absolutely not. We couldn't win that. That's a terrible commitment. I'd never do that. Okay, we'll give them 6 months where American soldiers are getting killed every day. Okay, do you want to leave this area? Oh, we can't leave. If we leave, that's a capitulation. That's surrender. That invites aggression. It's Munich all over again. It's Munich.
Cut and run.
Right, cut and run. As they say, okay, so what do you want to do? Well, we have to escalate. We have to put more troops in. Okay, well, they're going to respond and put more forces in to attack the troops. And then it's literally the Vietnam dynamic.
There's little bits of language all throughout this thing that I think are directed to particular audiences. And when he says, but let us be clear, the United States will maintain a military presence in Syria focused on ensuring ISIS cannot reemerge. Our military mission in Syria will remain conditions-based. We cannot make the same mistake, blah, blah, blah. The conditions-based statement there, I think, isn't that Mattis's term?
But that doesn't matter. Look, that's their view. But if this civil war has proven anything, it's that the American view doesn't carry that much weight in the region anymore anyway. But their view is, we're only here for conditions. We're only here for anti-ISIS operations. And the rest of the regional powers are going to be saying, yeah, you know what? Get out.
Yeah.
Leave. Especially as Assad gets stronger, as he takes more and more territory back. And Iranian militias are only getting more powerful and more prevalent. And now they're going to say, all right, ISIS is gone. First off, ISIS is mostly defeated already. I mean, that was the part. He's like 1 foot in the grave. It's back to what it was. It was a glorified cult group. And now it's back to that. So you've already basically destroyed ISIS. ISIS has been dislodged and mostly destroyed. The only thing, there are a lot of Sunni jihadists running around talking about the caliphate. That's welcome to the Middle East. There's always been a bunch of...
That's why they needed to reframe our reasons for staying, right? Time's running out. Because, Trump is going to want to declare victory over ISIS. But if he declares victory over ISIS, what happens to the anti-ISIS coalition? So, that's at least...
The ISIS coalition is getting torn apart right now by Turkish troops, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's another subject. I'm not ready to go into that one yet. That's crazy. That's a crazy situation. I mean, it's all all of these conflicts existed. Everybody knew they would come to a head, and they're coming to a head. So
anyway, let's do a last sweep recap.
Let me give you one little more bit of information, and then I'm done. After this speech, first of all, Tillerson mentions that this wasn't a planned speech. This was put together on short notice. And he thanks Condoleeza Rice for scrambling it together. And he mentions that he was in Vancouver meeting with other ministers before this, and he swung by California. But after the speech, so after this, he does a sit-down talk with Condoleeza Rice. I listened to most of it. It's mostly fluff in the beginning, two secretaries of state.
Yeah.
Talking, right? But then Tillerson goes he elaborates on, why we need to do this in Syria, and he gives his perspective on it. And he talks about how things change, but our values don't change. And then he goes on and he says, and he emphasizes this. He says, but the thing that has to be our top priority is people have to stop getting killed in Syria. He really, that's always been the thing. I don't have a side except those people in Syria who are just, in a living hell. And
let's throw some more guns in there. Maybe that'll probably calm things down.
But I think that's why I doubted whether Tillerson really, where he's coming from on this. Like, he seems like he's all in, but when he starts explaining about, what the most important things we need to do are, they're very peaceful sounding things. And I don't know if this guy has any idea what he's getting into with this. I really don't. And I don't think he's a dumb guy. I don't think he's dumb at all.
No, he's a conniving Machiavellian piece of shit. He's the CEO of ExxonMobil. You think he doesn't know how to make himself seem humane?
But you have this pool of, the foreign policy Borg that tends toward, of course, militarism and neoconservatism. And they've been pounding on the Trump administration, since the day they were elected. And there's been a lot of pressure toward Tillerson, although it was more like all kinds of rumors and this and that. And there have been some weird things, like Tillerson came out with sounded very reasonable policy before the cruise missiles, the beautiful chocolate cake cruise missiles, and a week later. I think Tillerson came out.
You're the only one who remembers that, by the way. Can I just put that as a side note? You keep making reference to that on other places, and I had to wait. Like, everybody else is like, I wonder what she's talking about, and then it's like, wait a minute, no, that's the Trump thing. When he said it was chocolate
I can never forget that.
Yeah, it's been stuck with you. There's other things that stick with me, but that I keep remembering that every time you mention it. But I wonder how many people. There's so many crazy Trump things that people remember that he said. I was eating a great piece of chocolate cake.
Beautiful chocolate cake, and then he tells the Chinese president, "By the way, I just bombed Syria." Which I always thought was a passive aggressive threat, but whatever.
Was it passive aggressive or just oblivious? You never really know with Trump.
I don't know. Just before that, he had Ivanka's daughter, sing them a song in Chinese. So it had to be one of the most surreal visits for that poor Chinese president and his wife.
That's the real problem with authoritarian family regimes: creepy parties.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we should probably wrap up.
All right. Just to sum up this speech, Tillerson has laid out a neoconservative worldview about how the Middle East should work, which is basically America and its allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, should dictate how things go. He's called for a regime change explicitly again, and he's called for a permanent military force there, ostensibly to make sure ISIS doesn't rise again. And he's saying after Assad's removed, he's also talked about creating kind of zones, more money pouring in for nation building to protect the zones that have been, quote unquote, liberated by the alliance forces. And, that's going to provide an example for the people of Syria, who he really cares about the will of the people of Syria. They're going to throw out Assad because they're going to see how great the liberated areas are. And then after Assad leaves, part of the mission will not be over until, quote unquote, foreign forces are removed, which not only includes Russia, but includes, of course, primarily Iran. So this is the 2011 position. It's 2018, but Rex Tillerson has laid out the Obama administration's initial position on Syria, the regime change position. And the only hope is that he doesn't mean it or that Trump ignores it. Because if we actually do follow these prescriptions for Syria, we're going to have either a war with Iran or a lot of dead American soldiers and us on the run, which I don't see happening. So this is very dangerous and very stupid, and one can only hope that Trump doesn't do it. That's my summation.
I agree. And in the show notes, there's a couple links. One of them is to a Washington Post editorial board piece where they're basically cheering on,
of course,
Tillerson's speech. And it's interesting because they frame it as, oh, well, Rex Tillerson's finally telling the truth. And the speech is full of just completely fabricated narrative, as we've mentioned numerous times.
Oh, Washington Post.
So I just found it interesting that they were saying, yes, this is the truth. Yeah, that truth. And anyway, and also the Paul Pillar piece titled "A New Decision to Go to War in Syria." I don't always agree with him, but I think he nails this one. And it's Groundhog Day. It's a reset, a restart to the same failed policies.
All right.
So, okay.
All right. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for Syria. Thank you for listening. That's our show. If you want to donate to the show, we really appreciate it. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire. You can follow us on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire. Follow Joanne @Joanne LEON, or me @US Empire Show. Questions, comments, want to yell at me, Dan @AroundTheEmpire.com. And please visit our website, AroundTheEmpire.com, where you can see all our interviews and stories and any other information about what we're putting on. Like us on Facebook, Around the Empire, and on YouTube. Deeply appreciate it. Thank you. See you next time.
Good night, everyone.